Welcome back. In New York, residents are still growing accustomed to the decades-long, believed to be gentrification of Harlem. The Bronx is known as the city's most urban borough. However, that is also changing quickly due to gentrification. The Bronx is in the midst of a revival, sparking praise among real estate professionals and stirring dread among working-class residents who face the prospect of possibly steepening living costs in one of the city's largest places of affordable housing. The South Bronx is also seeing a boom of development and new enterprise, and also talking about gentrifying low-income neighborhoods where rental and home sale prices have been rising rapidly. Our next guest is going to talk a little bit about that. He's a political commentator. Also, he's at BMCC, and he's also an attorney at Polanco Law. JC Polanco, and JC, good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Daren. How are you?
I'm good, brother, and looking forward to this conversation. I know we've talked about it before. Let's talk about it again. I use the word gentrification in our show, and I know that you have a way of saying gentrification really isn't that word that needs to be used. Talk to me about what you think, what you heard.
Look, words matter. Gentrification has not only negative connotations right now, but the word gentry is in gentrification. I don't like feeling as if other people are better than me. I don't like it. I don't like to think about it. I don't like to give it any credit. And I think that the overuse of the word gentrification as a negative could be problematic. It could be problematic for neighbors, could be problematic for all sorts of reasons. So I've always debated this issue on BronxNet because I've thought that the word is a problem. The reality could be a major issue for a lot of Bronxites. But at the end of the day, I think we should have the conversation whether or not economic development and what it brings is good for the borough. I say yes. And I know that many Bronxites also believe the answer is yes. So instead of looking at it as a negative, we should flip it and make it into a positive. Let's call it economic development. Let's call it reimagining our community. That's what's happening, Daren. And unfortunately, it's such a negative connotation to that word that I was in a debate a couple of years ago on BronxNet. Wow, did I get crucified on the comments? And I apologize for using that term, Pastor. But the truth of the matter is that, you know, this is such a delicate topic, and the word brings so much energy and spirit that I think that we should reevaluate giving this kind of credit as if having new people in a community means that we are getting cultured, as if we weren't refined as is. I'm very concerned with what happens when new people are coming in. If you consider those new people to somehow be refining a culture, then shame on you, right? Because we are a people filled with incredible culture in the Bronx. We are a people that are proud of our community. We are people that are proud of what we bring to the table. The fact that we have new investors coming in, new neighbors coming in, new businesses coming in, I've always saw that as a good thing. And I understand that a lot of Bronxites may disagree.
Yeah, well, the disagreement is, what if I live here for a long period of time and I'm actually being forced out of where I live? I want this to be home. I've spent time living here. And that's what happens when we talk about that word gentrification, right? Gentrification, you find people who are living there for a long time, and because of circumstances, they now are forced to move. And so we can talk about economic development. I think economic development is good. I think on the part of many people, everybody's pretty much in favor. So I'll ask you this: with what you see happening in the borough of the Bronx right now, how do you assess it? Do you view it as good or bad? We've heard about the piano district and how residents there felt like the district was beginning to shake, and the quote unquote piano district. So give me your thoughts.
Well, Daren, the truth of the matter is that I think you like economic development like most Bronxites, but you don't like what comes with it, right? Often what comes with economic development is construction. Often what comes with economic development is new business owners. Often what comes is new neighbors, right? These are things that come with economic development. And I have to be honest, if gentrification, as you call it, and I call it economic development, comes at the expense of pushing people out, well, then I'm not in favor of it. And I have to be honest with you. That's one of the biggest misconceptions that are out there. You know, our Bronxites have incredible protections against these so-called push-out phenomenons that we hear about often. I've debated this before on your program, Daren. The fact is that we have laws that protect our our neighbors and our tenants from being pushed out. Often what you do see is people that are in need of money be offered lump sum payments for them to leave so that a landlord could then in turn charge market rents for the apartment that has been recently vacated. So that's what you see. But the idea of pushing people out, we have to remember that we live in a city that is incredibly progressive and protects neighbors, protects tenants from the kind of things that I think a lot of people on social media talk about, this push out factor. This push out
But
factor happens when a neighbor or a tenant accepts a lump sum to leave an apartment so that the landlord could then rent it at market value. But one thing I want to talk about, Daren, that I think is important here, this villainization of JC Polanco on social media for saying that economic development is good. I'm concerned as I talk to you that there are people already ready to go. The truth of the matter is that I'm not in favor, and a lot of people are not in favor of people being pushed out. That's not fair. Remember that I grew up here. I'm a Bronx kid through and through. I'm 43 years old. I grew up here in the 80s and the 90s. I saw how bad things were. I saw white flight as we know it and teach about it in our sociology classes. I saw what happens when our neighbors leave and go to Westchester. I saw what happens when working class Black and Latinos decided to leave and leave us behind, those of us that were on public assistance and to fend for ourselves during the crack epidemic. I saw people dying to get out of the city. Now, for the first time, Daren, after a very long time, people are dying to come into the city. We see people moving in next door to places that we can never even fathom that happening. And that's because our elected officials, our community leaders, our business leaders worked hard to revitalize the Bronx and make it a place where people want to raise their families, where they want to work. And that is a good thing.
it's a good thing to want to come to the borough of the Bronx. I think that's amazing. I think it's good for people who want to come to New York City. The problem is right now, the way that the city is set up, and let's talk about New York City in general, people can't afford it.
Yeah, New York City is expensive. San Francisco is expensive. Cities are expensive, Daren. We have to be mindful of the fact that the forces of supply and demand are going to be ever present. We live in a mixed economy where our those that are financially disadvantaged often receive assistance from the rest of us to make sure they have enough money for health insurance in the form of Medicaid, to make sure they have enough to eat in the form of SNAP benefits, to make sure they have Section 8 and other assistance that we can provide for rental subsidies. So we are a great country. We are a great city. We work very hard to protect those that are less financially fortunate. The fact of the matter is that New York City, like other cities, are very expensive. Sadly, at the same time, and I think this is important, and this is where some of your viewers, whenever they see me on your screen, are ready to turn it off. But this is an issue I need to speak to your viewers about. When we have tenants that are paying 35 and 50% less, and some even more, than the market value of an apartment rental, that means that the next vacant apartment will have to pay more in rent to make up that difference. If not, there is no way that a landlord, small or large, will be able to pay for the fixed costs of operating a multifamily dwelling. I mean, think about it. Let's say we have 4 tenants and 2 of those tenants are paying 50, 60% below market value. The next 2 tenants are going to have to pay that much more to make up the lost income that's coming in from the subsidized or regulated rents. That's the reality. So that's what new families are experiencing. So those new college graduates, those new families trying to get their feet on the ground that want to live in New York City are finding enormous rents when they go out to rent for the first time. Much of that has to do not only with market forces, but with the regulation of some of those apartments that don't allow for the small mom and pop multifamily landlord like you and I, Daren, could be, to even pay our insurance, our maintenance, and our gasoline and oil, our gas and oil for a multifamily dwelling. So there's some serious things that we have to examine. And yes, there is another issue. When you look at other places like California, other large states like Texas and Florida, they all have other cities that are largely populated. So we are solely concentrated in New York City. Maybe it's time for us to talk about infrastructure, to talk with business owners as to how we could expand other parts of the state, like Syracuse, to maybe be a hub for new employees so that they can go out and find new places to live and businesses, new places to operate. But we have other beautiful places in New York that may be better viable options for people to consider. Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo. We could go down the list of other cities that I think if businesses were to dedicate money and infrastructure to, we could see a lot more people raising their families in places that could otherwise be more affordable. Now, if you want so a guest to tell you what you want to hear, right? I'm not the guy. I'm just being
Right.
honest. I think we have great places, Daren, and you know this well. Syracuse needs economic development. Why don't we consider working with Syracuse and other cities to see if we can get some businesses up there and maybe perhaps expand New York to other cities like other states have. So we're not only
But Jay, I have no problem with that. Listen, and everybody knows, I'm a Syracusean. But here's the thing: if I'm living in New York, I feel like I want to have the option. I want to have the option to live where I want to live, and not almost have to be forced because of economics, because of this, to have to move out and find a place where I don't want to go. If my family grew up here, it's if I grew up here and we grew up, that's not it. My sister's a perfect case of example. She won't live with me. She likes living in New York City, and I don't blame her. This is what you knew. This is where you grew up, and I think that you should be afforded the opportunity. I think the problem is that people are actually being priced out. But I'm gonna come to you from another perspective right now. We're talking about COVID-19, and we're talking about a lot of these businesses right now who used to do business in New York City may not be taking up that rent space to do business anymore. Could we be seeing a huge rental crisis, as well as also, a economic crisis, given the fact that we see unemployment rates being sky high and what's going on now?
Of course, I think that market forces will be present. I think considering that so many of us are using Zoom like we're doing now, I think it's clear that rents are going to decrease a great deal in Manhattan, especially. And I think as the economy suffers because of COVID, we're going to see more people being laid off, and it is why it's so important that the government steps in to support our people in this time of need. These are tough times. These aren't regular times. So, we're talking about economic development and issues of expansion of economic development in other cities, assuming we're going to get back on our feet because a vaccine is in the horizon. But these are terrible times where people are having an impossible time just paying their rents as is. So, I understand those concerns. First, to your first issue as to I want to live in New York City. I love New York City. I'm from here. I graduated college and came right back to the Bronx to teach because I love, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. So I understand that a great deal. I'm just concerned about what happens to expectations. What happens to new families when they see themselves being priced out? These politicians that mean so well don't want to be honest with the fact that the more regulation we place on rent control, the more expensive we make it for new young families to get on their feet. That's a fact. And I think it was something that we should at least discuss, because if we don't take that into consideration, we're going to continue finding ourselves being priced out of places that we want to live. If we continue to have people pay, 35, 50, even higher percentage less than what an apartment is worth, somebody has to make up that difference. And the law allows for new tenants to be the ones that have to pay the market value. That's the problem for me. And when you say that, it puts people on the defensive, because that means that the rents are going to go up so high. The fact of the matter is that the rents, if you consider the market forces of supply and demand with the responsible regulation that I think must be in place, you would see rent lowered for new families to be able to rent in new places. And then at what point do we now recognize that some families may not have the option of living in New York City? What if that actually happens to be the case? If a politician says that, he'll never get a vote. But what happens when you have to tell a family you do not make enough money to live in New York City, even with all the subsidies, right? Does that mean that that people are now going to have to create new buildings to make room for these individuals? Well, we do that now. And Mayor de Blasio promised over 220,000 developments. I don't think he's anywhere close to that, 22,000 units. But we've gone above and beyond. The question then becomes, to what point? I mean, what do Bronxites think? I would love to know what Bronxites think. If you cannot afford to live in an area, what do you want there to? What's the solution? What's the conclusion? That the government subsidize the rent? Okay, we'll do that. that we provide new additional units, we'll do that. What if that's not enough? And that's when people get frustrated. And that stress leads to a lot of negativity here in New York City. We should realize that, hey, no matter how much I'd like to live on Reed Street down by Tribeca, that's not going to happen, right? So we look for places that we can live and raise our families. And that's why many of our immigrant parents came here. They sought a better opportunity elsewhere where they too can have a better option of raising their family. We should really talk to New Yorkers about having that discussion. Sometimes New York City may not be the place because you can't afford it. And no matter what we do, you may not be able to afford living in New York City because of the market forces, even with having a mixed economy and subsidized rents and the like.
But when I look at what's happening right now, we look at what's happening right now, we know that after COVID-19, as a matter of fact, in previous segment, 2 million New Yorkers filed unemployment claims. 2 million. It's bad out here, right? And we understand that it's bad out here. So with the way that it's going to be moving towards the future, we know the economic state of New York as a state already has some huge, it's going to be years for us to be able to really come out of what we've had based on COVID-19. And so I guess the anticipation is you will see more people unemployed, and you also will see more people potentially homeless, given the fact that you can't afford where you are.
Well, you know, this is a real problem. And again, for your viewers and for you, Daren, because I know you and I have a lot of conversations. My point as to the market forces, economic supply and demand and rent are considering not this climate, right? All else being equal. This situation we hear now is dire. We have a lot of tenants that cannot pay their rents. They're begging for relief from the federal government. They're begging for relief from the state government. The fact of the matter is this is where the government has to step up. You know, and it's weird listening to someone who believes in capitalism telling you this, but if there was ever a time for us to espouse the importance of having a mixed economy, is now. You know, Governor Cuomo and his many, you know, through all his faults, in his hearings, he says something that I really value and I really studied and I really want your viewers to think about. Consider how much money we send to Washington and how much money we get back. I've always found that to be fascinating. We send billions of dollars to Washington, considering what we get back is a lot less. And that as opposed to other states who have less taxes that they charge their residents, other states who get more money from the federal government but pay less into the bucket. I think that the federal government dropped the ball. I think that the federal government now needs to really step up and make sure that state and local governments have the money they need considering the pandemic. And that may mean rent relief for tenants and for small business, small mom and pop landlords that are suffering a great deal by having tenants that aren't paying their rents. And it's really killing them because a lot of these small landlords have to pay their mortgages and they're dependent on that rent. So it may be the time right now for the federal government to consider what's happening in New York, considering how much we've been devastated, consider that we are sending a lot more than we get back, and that again, Governor Cuomo, I don't give him a lot of credit, but this was interesting to me. How many more of those states across the country depend on New York for our taxes? Yet those are the same elected officials that in Washington vote against helping us out right now. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So to answer your question, Daren, it's time for the government to help our tenants out. And it's time for the government to also consider the pain that small mom and pop landlords are going through across the Bronx and to really help them out. I think this is the right time.
Talked with people at the Fordham Business Improvement District, talked over there, Parkchester as well, and there's huge concerns. I mean, the big concern is that basically we'll be priced out to a place where, you know, I can't do business the way that I used to do business, and I might not be able to maintain it. So when I think about what's going on across New York City, you know, we see things with the potential of actually getting worse before actually getting better. Do you agree that we're going to be in it for a minute?
I think so. I think unless the federal government recognizes how important it is to provide us the assistance that we need, we're going to be in this position for a while. And not to mention that we don't know how the vaccine is going to react. We hope that it does a good job. We're hearing that there's anywhere from 90 to 95% effectiveness with some of these vaccines that are coming out into the public. We're hearing that December 11th may be the earliest date that we hear of a vaccine coming for first responders and those that are most in need of the vaccine. But the vaccine is going to be very important to change the way we do things. We're not going to shake hands again for a long time. We're not going to be able to walk outside without a mask for a long time. We're not going to be able to sit with each other in offices without social distancing for a long time. And that's going to require the federal government to do its part in assisting New York get out of this mess. Because remember that if we don't recognize that this has changed life for the economic engine of the country here in New York, we're going to pay dire consequences when the state has to now lay off teachers, cops, first responders, if we don't get the kind of funding that we need in an emergency manner. We'll talk about, and then I'll come onto your show and talk about the responsibilities of, correct budgeting and tax cuts. And we'll have those conversations because I think they're important. But when it comes to a crisis like this, it changes the conversation, and we have to come in and come together as one and make sure that we protect our most vulnerable and our those that are the most financially disadvantaged.
And I think when you're looking at it right now and you really look at what we're dealing with, I mean, you're talking about a situation where mass transit is about to see massive cuts. And if mass transit has to see massive cuts, you have to know, to the average New Yorker, there's going to be a huge impact.
I mean, just think about the mass transit in New York City is how we get to work, right? It's how we get around, millions of us. Cutting that is going to be devastating for us as a city. And more importantly, it's going to be devastating for our infrastructure. Our infrastructure has needed to be redeveloped for quite some time. We started off our discussion today talking about economic development and what it brings. It brings new people. It brings new neighbors that weren't here before. We all of a sudden see an increase in the population in New York City. That puts a strain on our hospitals. It puts a strain on our schools and on our roads and on our bridges and in our subway system and in our buses. So, this is a time where we really have to consider how those cuts to mass transit, even though we're experiencing economic turmoil with getting people to work in the city, as most vacancies are happening in Manhattan, is still the pipeline for how we get our economic engine going. So, cutting off our services from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. is one thing. Cutting off our services and laying off thousands of workers in the MTA will be devastating for our economy and for our fellow New Yorkers.
Yeah. What do you hear? I mean, I've asked on this show all the time, people with boots on the ground. What do you hear? You got boots on the ground. What do you hear from the hearts and minds of New Yorkers, given the fact that what the times that we're living in right now?
New Yorkers are incredibly resilient. And I have to tell you that you see concern with some of the people that I've spoken to about what's the future hold, what's going to happen this winter, how's the economy gonna be? They're worried about rents, but New Yorkers are focused and they work hard no matter what. They persevere. We have gone through issues before as a city. We come out even better on the other end. And I think that's what we see from our fellow New Yorkers. And I'm sure you could agree. When you look at the staff at BronxNet and when you speak to people down at Lehman College, life has changed because classes are now on Zoom. The studios are now electronic, but there's a lot of hope, even though we know that things are going to go bad in the winter months. And we've heard President-elect Biden discuss that this is going to be a dark winter. I think a lot of us are in agreement, but our resilience as New Yorkers doesn't allow for us to dwell on the negativity. It forces us to focus on the positivity and how we're going to get through this as a city. And that's what I keep seeing from my neighbors across the Bronx. That's why I think we're a special people.
We are special people. We're special people that are trying to make it and navigate through some of the most toughest times that we've seen in years and decades. We had a time when we talked about the Bronx is burning, and now the Bronx comes back to booming. But now we've got a pandemic, and that pandemic has also altered some things. So as we close out the segment, I just want to get your final thoughts on what you would say to people in a time like this. As we're trying to get towards 2021 and still trying to navigate the worst of 2020?
Well, Daren, again, Bronxites and many of the folks that I know in Manhattan, we come from people that arrived in the United States from conditions that are unimaginable. From my neighbors that are from Albania, to my neighbors from the Dominican Republic and Haiti, to those that are here from Mexico across the street, and to my friends from Ghana that are diagonal to me. Um, I have to tell you the stories that we get from Bronxites as to where they come from, the hardships that they've experienced, why they arrived to New York. It's an incredible story, and all of it is united by one common theme, which is we persevere through darkness and through difficult times, and we seek the positive in some of the most bleak circumstances. That's a uniting theme that I think I've seen among most of my neighbors. So we have to be positive. We have to stick together. We have to support each other right now. Now is not the time to appear selfish, and I implore politicians on both sides of the aisle, especially those on my side, guys, not right now. This is an emergency situation. We really need your understanding to supply for the needs of the people. Our pantry lines are longer than ever. Unemployment is higher than ever. We have neighbors that are afraid of not being able to pay their rents. This is where we need our politicians to come together, work as one. After we set everything up, we'll get back to fighting, but not right now.
All right, JC Polanco, we got to leave it there. Thank you, my brother, for coming and sharing with us as we always have engaging and lively conversation.
Thank you so much, Daren. Always a pleasure.
All right, JC Polanco, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums.